This is GovExec Daily, where we bring you the federal stories that really matter. It's August 19th, 2021. I'm Ross John Fortune. The federal government has a problem hiring young people into its ranks. The hiring process can be difficult, and the pathways for young, interested potential employees are full of roadblocks. On our show last month, author and college student Caitlin Rentala explained how hard it is for Gen Z to get into public service, particularly when it comes to the time frame of hiring.
Something that I've heard constantly from people who interviewed for entry-level federal jobs is that they may apply for a job, they may wait months on end to hear if they got an interview or not. Or if they even get an interview, they may wait months on end to find out if they have a second interview or if they got the position. We can't have months on end of waiting around to see if we get the position. Life moves really fast when you're a junior in college, when you're a senior in college.
But OPM is working to change that. The Federal Human Resources Agency is in the process of issuing regulations to make it easier for agencies to pay and offer jobs to their interns who are still in college. The rule sets up a new expedited hiring authority to offer temporary or term appointments in the competitive service to students pursuing undergraduate and graduate degrees who are college interns and recent graduates. In a blog post, OPM chief Kiran Ahuja said the rule will make it easier for agencies to recruit and retain the next generations of feds. Perhaps this will make it easier to get Gen Z into federal service. GovExec senior correspondent Erich Wagner covers the workforce for us. After a short break, he'll join me to discuss the new OPM rules and other workforce stories that he has been covering. Want to hear more from GovExec, NextGov, Defense One, and Route 50? Tune in to our virtual events to hear interviews with government leaders about the most important topics today, including the federal workforce, health IT, artificial intelligence, 5G, and more. Visit govexec.com/events to learn more. Internships are a good way for young people to get experience in their preferred line of work, a way to buttress a resume, and a way for organizations to create a pipeline for young employees. Federal agencies do have strict regulations on internship programs and how they can put interns onto a path of full employment, but the Office of Personnel Management is in the process of issuing regulations to make it easier for agencies to pay and offer jobs to their interns who are still in college. GovExec senior reporter Erich Wagner covers the federal workforce for us. He joins me now to discuss the new OPM regulations and other stories that affect feds. Welcome back to the program.
Good to be here.
So the government has trouble hiring young people, but as I mentioned up top, OPM is making it easier for agencies to hire candidates who are still in college, first attempt jobs, and then potentially to full employment. What's the span of this new rule? What can you tell me about it?
Sure. So, this rule, it fits nicely into the Biden administration's, some of their other workforce efforts. In a recent executive order on diversity in the workforce, they specifically called out trying to make sure that, ending the practice of unpaid internships in the federal government. The idea behind that is unpaid internships predominantly tend to attract people who already, they are either already wealthy on their own or they have someone they can rely on because, it's hard to work without pay unless you have got some money to pay for rent, Anyways, but these regulations actually jump back to a couple of years ago in 2 different years of National Defense Authorization Acts. Congress had been seeing that the federal government has had trouble, like you said, getting its interns to then become federal employees out of college. So this comes from those, I think it's 2018 and 2019 provisions of the NDAA. Basically, what happens here is OPM has set up a special hiring authority for agencies for post-secondary students, whether they be undergrads or grad students. And they don't have to post these jobs on USA Job, although they can, because that would make it easier for some reporting requirements. And basically, if you're an intern, you would get a temporary appointment, which is 1 year, or a term appointment, which is anywhere from 1 to 4 years, to be paid for your work at a GS11 level or below, depending on the job, obviously. And then that can be you working for the agency part-time while you're studying. It can be a traditional internship program where, like, you take a semester off or a summer off from taking classes and full-time work for the agency. Or it could be, somewhere in between. It's interesting. There are a lot of flexibilities that, maybe you have a good internship, you continue to work part-time at the agency while you wrap up classes and get your degree. But also there are ways to basically, it's called a break-in program. So if you have a summer internship that went really well, but you want to go full-time back to school just to finish up, you would technically still be a term federal employee, even though you're not really working, because of this break-in program that allows you to go back and finish your studies and then come back. And basically, all of this sets up an option for an agency to convert these employees, once they have their degrees and they meet some other criteria, to become permanent employees if they wish.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know that's something that a lot of industries do. It's certainly not something that the government should be missing out on, especially as we've covered on this show. It can be hard for young people to get into federal service. Let's move to some other stories. GSA released the per diems last week. What is the agency saying about it? And I guess looking forward, is it time for feds to start traveling for business again?
Well, so they released the lodging and travel per diems. They have not released the mileage ones, although that's mainly because for some reason lodging and travel per diem changes over at the beginning of the fiscal year, whereas mileage per diem for some reason flips over at the end of the calendar year. So who knows why that is, but basically GSA said that it will be keeping the lodging rates at 2021 levels beginning in October. Reflects the fact that the hotel industry really hasn't seen much activity, obviously, because of the pandemic. Meal and expenses per diems are increasing slightly. I think it's a couple of dollars, depending on where you live. But it's unclear whether really this signals a return to travel. I think a lot of that is still wholly dependent on the agency reopening plans, vaccination rates and Delta transmission rates in various regions. But the fiscal year, this this per diem announcement is a function of the fiscal year ending in 6 weeks, and they have to announce the new rates.
Yeah, I think I sort of set you up for failure there as far as predictions, because who knows what's going to happen in the next day, week, month, year when it comes to transmission on the pandemic and vaccination rates and things like that. We'll move over to the Justice Department and talk about an issue of concern for AUSAs at Justice. They are talking about pay. You wrote a story about this. What's the AUSA beef with the agency, and how will it resolve?
Sure. So AUSAs are frustrated that they make, at least starting salary wise, they can make it significantly less than attorneys elsewhere in the department, at so-called main justice. AUSAs across the country, their entry level salary can be $40,000 less per year than attorneys elsewhere in the department, and that's just counting basic pay, not locality pay. And they say that really, this is this letter was geared toward getting the justice as part of their required review of diversity, equity, and inclusion metrics due to a Biden executive order. Again, we talked a little bit about this earlier, and they're this is very similar to the internship thing. They argue that when you come out of law school, you've paid a lot of money. And so lower paying attorney jobs, aren't really in reach for a lot of diverse and underserved communities because, they are taking out more loans, as the research has shown, in order to be able to afford law school at all. So they are more likely to have to go to the higher paying jobs, be they at Main Justice, be they at big law, So AOCs argue that their ranks are whiter and richer because those are the people who can afford to take that pay cut right out the gate.
Is will there be any movement on that from justice? I mean, is this something that the Justice Department's going to take seriously? They've got a lot on their plate now, so I suspect not, but
I mean, it's hard to say. These diversity reviews are going to happen sort of behind the scenes at all of these agencies. So, and OPM at least has been talking a lot about the executive order, but it's hard to say how seriously other agencies will take them until we see whatever results they produce publicly.
So back to, well, not back to, but staying on the Justice Department and DEI, the DOJ Gender Equity Network is now calling for OPM to ban salary history from hiring. I guess the first question is why? And the second question is, how will that help diversity, equity, and inclusion in government?
Again, this is sort of a similar issue. OPM regulations currently allow agencies to ask for salary history when they're hiring. And while this diversity and pay equity push is going on in the federal government, this group is keenly focused on that because salary history as a negotiating tool in the hiring process has long been held up as a way that pay inequities across gender and race, sexual orientation, it has allowed those pay, it's a system that allows these pay equities to persist even if you change the underlying policies. Because if you have a man and a woman who both got 15 years of experience in the same job, and for those 15 years, because of the pay inequities, the man's been making more than the woman, and they both apply to this, they both get hired to the same job, the guy is still going to get paid more if you're looking at salary history. So, the diversity executive order that Biden signed actually calls on OPM to examine the issue of, getting rid of salary histories, but it allows for an exception in which, in situations where the applicant themselves provides their salary history unprompted. And so the Gender Equity Network at DOJ is calling on OPM to get rid of that exception as well. Basically, they argue that, especially, in their department with lawyers everywhere, lawyers are pretty savvy folk. They will, the people who know that their salary history will get them higher salaries moving forward will continue to provide that. It's sort of, they describe it as the exceptions swallowing the rule, because anyone who's benefited from pay inequities will continue to provide their salary history unprompted.
That seems like there are ways around this, which would make sense considering, the ingrained, inequality here. We'll end on this just because we've talked about it a lot on the show. Feds can get in big trouble if they lie to their agencies about whether or not they've been vaccinated. Usually in the labor world, that sort of thing is bargained. This stuff is up for negotiation. how is this going to play out for AFG, NTU, those kinds of public sector employee unions? Are they going to have to do something after the fact? How is this going to work?
Well, we should clarify briefly that, specifically, that is not the kind of thing that gets bargained. That is a government-wide policy. It's the same thing as, the drug testing policy in the federal government. If you fail a drug test and you have a security clearance, you're going to lose that security clearance. That's just the way it is. But what they can bargain over is how this policy is implemented. And the way that's going to play out, I think, is going to depend largely on whether your agency is working remotely or whether you're in that group of federal employees who still have to go to work. So let's say if you are still going to work, the agency is likely going to impose the rules of the vaccine mandate / testing and masking stuff on you without bargaining ahead of time. There may have been some consultation with the union, but largely those, the bargaining that will happen over implementation will happen sort of after the fact, and then they will adjust the rules when they reach a deal that way. Whereas if you are working remotely, it is not considered the same emergency that allows the agency to just implement unilaterally and then ask for permission later. So you'll see a lot more concrete discussion of how they'll be implemented ahead of its implementation at other agencies like that.
So this will, more than anything, a lot of frontline people will have to deal with this, I suspect, right? The, law enforcement people that have to be in the office, people without telework options, correct?
Yeah.
It's interesting to see the speed of this and the way that things are moving and how it's going, but we'll certainly keep with it. And I know a lot of our listeners are very much interested in the consequences and procedures for this stuff. But in the meantime, Eric, thanks for being on the show with us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to GovExec Daily. Our show is produced by Adam Butler and hosted by me, Ross John Fortuna. I want to thank Erich Wagner for joining the program. Our music is the song Signals by Catfish Dancing. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can email us any feedback at podcast@govexec.com or hit us up on Twitter @govexec. We'd love to hear from you. We'll talk to you later.